America, when it has what it calls foreign policy, is how to overthrow governments we don't like.
ليش ما يكون فيها تحقيق في مقتل صدام حسين؟ قيادة عربية بالكامل تقتل تشنق في المشانق ونحن نتفرج، لماذا؟ وممكن الدور جاي عليكم كلكم. نعم. ليش أمريكا قاتلت مع صدام حسين ضد الخميني؟ كان صديقها. تشيني كان صديق لصدام حسين. رامسفيلد كان وزير دفاع الأمريكا لما كان يدمروا في العراق، صديق حميم لصدام حسين، وأخيرا باعوه وشنقوه. حتى أنتم أصدقاء أمريكا، نحن أصدقاء أمريكا، بلاش نقول أنتم، نحن أصدقاء أمريكا كلنا. قد توافق أمريكا على شنقنا في يوم ما.
An old man's mouth may quiver, but it does not lie. It has been 16 years since, in 2008, in the capital city of Syria, Damascus, President Gaddafi told the leaders of Arab nations something serious. Sadly, they all laughed. But today, those who laughed have either been killed, overthrown, or forced to flee the countries they once ruled. President Gaddafi warned the Arab leaders present in Syria that the killing of President Saddam Hussein, which they silently watched, would have consequences, one by one, until none of them remained. Many now see this as a prophecy come true. It seems like war has become a legacy among Arab regimes, passed down like a royal curse. Now listen carefully to this part. What former U.S. Army General Wesley Clark said in 2007 about the military agenda following the 9/11 attacks, which claimed the lives of hundreds. He spoke bluntly, shedding all pretenses, and declared,
"This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
These countries refused to help one another during the wars imposed on them by Western powers. And as a result, they each fell one by one, just like what happened in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and even Iran, which is now being silently targeted while the world watches without intervening. Arab wars are talked about around the world. Some lose everything in them, others gain billions of dollars, with money flooding into their accounts like heavy rain. Some say Arabs are hopeless, always in war, they keep bombing each other, this and that. But what you say about Arabs has been spoon-fed to you, bit by bit, by Western media. It's part of a long-term, evil agenda, to smear mud on the white robes of Arabs, to make the world see them as the problem. Then America and its allies come in, using war as a pretext, saying the Arabs are ungovernable, while they extract every valuable resource buried beneath Arab soil. But ask yourself, who benefits from these wars? Why do some pretend it's none of their concern, watching from their televisions as countries burn, while sipping a drink in comfort? Today, let us return to the betrayal America and its allies carried out, systematically eliminating powerful Arab leaders, one by one, to plunder the oil beneath their lands. Let's begin in Syria, once one of Asia's shining jewels. In 2010, it was ranked among the top 31 most beautiful countries in the world, a destination worth visiting. From there, we crossed the Mediterranean Sea to visit Gaddafi's Libya, once a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, it has become a wasteland, overflowing with garbage and abandoned by its own citizens. From Libya, we head to its neighbor, Egypt, to witness what happened to Hosni Mubarak, one of those who laughed at Gaddafi. And as for Sudan, you already know, Omar al-Bashir was stripped of power and the country was torn in two. Welcome to the world of research. Welcome to the large family of WIN, Wisdom in Narrations. In order for what we've started to have direction, we must go back to stories that have already ended. There's a small point I want to highlight. Listen to what the former British ambassador, also a human rights activist, Craig Murray, wrote on his blog. A truly seismic change in the Middle East appears to be happening very fast. At its heart is a devil's bargain. Turkey and the Gulf states accept the annihilation of the Palestinian nation and creation of a greater Israel in return for the annihilation of the Shia minorities of Syria and Lebanon and the imposition of Salafism across the Eastern Arab world. Ambassador Craig, known for never compromising among his own people, wrote, "What's happening is that Turkey and powerful Arab countries have given the West and their bosses a green light to destroy Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and other regions, in exchange for allowing Turkey and its Arab allies to suppress the Shia Muslim populations in those countries while spreading Salafism. Salafism is a school of thought and ideology aimed at spreading Sunni Islam to the point where Shia Muslims are eliminated and only Sunnis remain. Do you remember that Iran is predominantly Shia? Do you remember that Iran doesn't get along with Turkey, the UAE, or Saudi Arabia because those are Sunni nations? Keep that in mind. Let's move quickly to Syria, which has already been reduced to rubble after 14 years of continuous bombings. On December 8, 2024, President Bashar al-Assad took a hard look at all his efforts to protect the land of his ancestors and resist colonialism, only to scatter in defeat and flee as his country was taken over by groups that once had million-dollar bounties on their heads. Syria's catastrophe began in 2011, just 3 years after Muammar Gaddafi warned Arab leaders of a coordinated plan to wipe them out, and months after Gaddafi himself was assassinated. In Syria that year, the so-called civil war aimed at forcing Assad out of power was a complete lie. It was actually a war led by more than 100,000 jihadist fighters from across the world sent to topple Assad's government. Hundreds of weapon shipments started flowing into Syria, mainly through Turkey. Understand this: the campaign to destroy Syria involved America and Israel, supplying weapons, money, and spreading false narratives, painting Assad's regime as evil and in need of regime change. Saudi Arabia and Qatar provided funding. Qatar also used Al Jazeera as a propaganda tool to turn the world against Assad. Turkey and Jordan became stockpiling zones for military gear used by terrorist groups fighting in Syria. The UK and France also gave money, intelligence, and infiltrated Assad's inner circle to betray him from within. They tried every evil trick to topple Assad. You've likely heard stories accusing Assad of killing his own people using sarin, chlorine, and mustard gas. Those were lies. In 2018, a journalist from the American outlet OAN traveled to Syria, to the very place where Assad was accused of using chemical weapons. The locals told him directly,
"So the residents told me that the terrorists staged this attack to get the Western powers to attack the Syrian army and get them off their backs so that they could escape." And that story was told to us by numerous people. So I asked them also what they thought about President Bashar al-Assad, because that's also a big question for a lot of people. I mean, you hear people like Boris Johnson and other leaders saying that President Bashar is terrorizing his people and that he's being very brutal to them. And again, this is just repeating facts that are out there in the media right now. And so when I talked to the people who lived in these towns, they specifically said that they loved Bashar al-Assad. They thought that he was great, and they said that...
The ironic part, CNN journalists went to the scene where the false claims said Assad had used chemical weapons. They began sniffing clothes suspected of carrying the poison, as if anyone in their right mind would dare to go near a piece of clothing laced with a deadly chemical agent. Remember CNN's theatrical report claiming to have entered a prison where Assad supposedly detained his enemies? They claimed to find someone in terrible shape who hadn't seen daylight in 3 months and had barely eaten. But the person shown looked perfectly fine. It was propaganda. part of a media comedy staged by Western outlets. Why were these countries investing billions in Assad's downfall? The United States had a clear goal: fragment Arab unity so that its child, Israel, could expand its territorial ambitions. It also aimed to loot natural resources. Qatar had its own economic stakes, ensuring that gas pipelines supplying Turkey and Europe ran through its territory. But Assad's government refused, insisting the pipeline must run from Iran instead of Qatar. That decision made Assad a direct obstacle to Qatar's interests, and they wanted him out of the way. The tragedy is this: Syria, now reduced to ruins, was once a thriving, secure country. In 2010, the New York Times ranked Syria among the top 31 must-visit countries in the world. Damascus, the capital, was ranked the 7th best city globally for tourism. Why? Because under Assad's leadership, Syria was prosperous and peaceful, until colonial powers turned against him. That same year, Vogue magazine ran a story titled "A Rose in the Desert," profiling First Lady Asma al-Assad's outstanding work. The article highlighted Syria's impressive progress in education, entertainment, social care, and hospitality. Asma, born and raised in the UK, met Assad while he was studying ophthalmology there. At one point, Western powers admired Assad deeply, even calling him the Lion of Damascus. France awarded him the Legion of Honor. Queen Elizabeth once invited the Assad family to visit. US Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Syria. Arab and European leaders frequently met with Assad. Even Pope Benedict XVI visited the country. Syria, under Assad, was a sanctuary where Sunnis, Shias, Christians, Alawites, Kurds, Armenians, and others lived peacefully side by side. There were no Al-Qaeda groups, no Islamic terrorism based on extremist ideologies. The country had secular governance, not ruled by Sharia law. The Syrian people truly loved Assad. He used to walk freely through the streets of Damascus without bodyguards. In 2009, media reports described him as the most loved leader in the Arab world. He wasn't just a good president, he was a devoted family man. But this extraordinary man was falsely accused, manipulated, and targeted by powers who wanted to enslave him to their agenda. Assad was humble. He visited mosques and churches of all denominations. He protected Christians from jihadist attacks, many of which were funded by the US and NATO. Because of prolonged sanctions, Syria has suffered immense economic hardship since 2011. The country's main export was oil. Today, those oil fields are controlled by Kurdish militias backed by the US in northeastern Syria-Euphrates region. Another major export is Captagon, a powerful amphetamine drug known for enhancing focus. It became a critical source of income due to the dire poverty. Syria's army was severely underfunded. The government refused to bow to Turkey. Tensions between Iran and Israel affected Syria directly. Foreign aid dwindled. It's not hard to believe that some Syrian troops may have been bribed by Americans, Turks, or Israelis to lay down their weapons and allow Assad's enemies to advance. Nick Fuentes, an American political commentator and outspoken advocate of American nationalism, has often shared his views on international conflicts, including the war in Syria. During public forums and interviews, he stated that the war in Syria was not about bringing peace to Syrians, but rather a coordinated effort to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad in a coup d'etat. Jeffrey David Sachs, an American economist and public policy analyst and a professor at Columbia University, described the Syrian civil war as an American-led regime change operation against President Assad. In his words,
"And in the Middle East, how many of you appreciate that the so-called Syrian civil war was an American-led regime change operation against Assad that went wrong because it turned out Assad had friends, the Russians and the Iranians. and we blame them for the war. We started the war.
After the fall of Assad, a new power struggle erupted in Syria among various factions, each aiming to control the country. Syria remains without peace to this day. The country is still a battlefield, especially between various Arab militant groups, many of which are made up of extremists seeking to establish an Islamic state based on strict religious doctrine. Then there are the Kurds, pushing for their own independence in northern Syria. Meanwhile, Russia and Iran continue to back what's left of Assad's regime. Between all these factions, missiles and rockets fly like storms, raining chaos and destruction. Turkey opposes the Kurds, but at the same time tries to expand its own influence in the region. The United States and its allies, including Israel, have also carved out control over parts of Syria, especially the Golan Heights, under the guise of protecting their strategic interests in the Arab world, particularly concerning natural resources. Speaking of resources, let's look at this. In 2015, an Israeli publication, Times of Israel, published a report revealing that major oil reserve said found on Golan. An Israeli company called Afek Oil and Gas, which specializes in petroleum and gas exploration, began operations in the Golan Heights, a region that legally belongs to Syria. Afek Oil and Gas is a subsidiary of the American company Genie Energy. Its headquarters are located at 19 Ramban Street, Jerusalem 92422, Israel. Now you can understand why the United States was so invested in opposing Assad. Afek Oil and Gas confirmed the discovery of a large quantity of oil in the region. However, the quality, exact volume, and cost-effective extraction methods remain undisclosed. In the October 7, 2015 report by Times of Israel, published at around 4:17 a.m., it was explicitly stated that the oil exploration company working in the Golan Heights had discovered a significant quantity of oil reserves. Yuval Bartov, the chief geologist at Afek Oil and Gas, under the parent company Genie Energy, stated, "We're talking about a layer 350 meters thick. That thickness is nearly 10 times greater than what is normally considered significant in global oil exploration." Bartov added, "And that's why we're talking about significant amounts. What's important is to know that there's oil in the rock, and this we know." 3 oil drilling sites in the Golan Heights have reportedly uncovered billions of barrels of oil, enough to meet Israel's domestic demand of approximately 270,000 barrels per day for many years, according to reports. The exploratory drilling, which amounts to looting since it's conducted on land that legally belongs to another country, Syria, began in December 2014. Recently, Afek Oil and Gas submitted a request to drill 10 more wells. Although a significant oil deposit has been confirmed, the company claims that the quality, actual volume, and cost-effective extraction methods will only be determined once full-scale production begins. Since the establishment of Israel, over 530 exploratory wells have been drilled across the country, but none had previously yielded commercially viable oil, according to Jeff Roshwager, CEO of Genie Energy, as stated in a November report. This is one of the core reasons why Israel consistently remains aggressive toward its neighbors, especially those sitting on top of oil. Now the big question, is the looting happening in Syria today truly Syrian-led, or is someone else benefiting? The leader of HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who played a key role in toppling Assad, has refused to confront Israeli forces that have taken over parts of Syria. These Israeli troops are stationed just 19 kilometers from Damascus. This strongly suggests a deal between Israel and HTS, the militant group currently operating in Syria. Today, after capturing the Golan Heights, Israel has gone further, seizing Mount Hermon and villages in southern Syria, including Khan Arnabe and Al-Bath city. Many say this is the reward for helping HTS in their mission to remove Assad. However, Giuliani's grip on power, after a month of ruling parts of Syria, is already slipping. Many of his own HTS fighters are turning against him, accusing him of doing nothing meaningful since taking control. His refusal to confront Israeli forces over Syria's sovereignty has made many of his supporters view him as a traitor to HTS's original ideology. Despite all that, the United States and its leader, Donald Trump, do not view Gulen as a villain. In fact, even today, they see him as a saint and a savior for Syria, so much so that the US is now prepared to lift sanctions on Syria after more than 12 years. When they last met in Saudi Arabia on the morning of May 15, 2025, they greeted each other like a child and a parent. In a report covering the moment, ABC7 stated,
President Trump met with the Syrian president in Saudi Arabia this morning. The new Syrian leader is a former insurgent once jailed by U.S. forces after being captured in Iraq. Trump has agreed to end sanctions against Syria, a country that has been shattered by more than a decade of civil war.
From this, let me briefly mention ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, the infamous terror group that played a catastrophic role in Syria's destruction. In 2016, during his presidential campaign, Donald Trump publicly declared before a crowd that President Obama was the founder of ISIS in Syria and that Hillary Clinton, his opponent in the election, had also played a part in its creation. He said,
ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS, okay? He's the founder.
This is where it gets serious. Let's break it down clearly. What I'm about to say might be hard to grasp at first. But once I mention Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, your heart may skip a beat. This man led the extremist terrorist group known for its radical, violent interpretation of Islam, ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. His mission was clear: commit acts of terrorism, murder and violate human rights, destroy cultural heritage. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi rose to power in 2014 as the leader of ISIS. He was killed in 2019 during a US military operation. After his death, he was succeeded by Abu al-Hussein al-Husseini al-Qurashi, who was himself replaced in April 2023 by Abu Hafs al-Hashimi al-Qurashi after also being killed. What's alarming is this: these ISIS extremists were reportedly operating from tents provided by USAID, the US government's humanitarian aid agency. There were times when Pentagon planes dropped weapons intended for moderate rebel groups in Syria, but the supplies ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The US often claimed this was an accident, but it kept happening. This open support for terrorist factions began in 2011 as the war in Syria intensified. Eventually, President Bashar al-Assad, facing collapse, turned to the one man many call a beast, Vladimir Putin. He humbled himself before the Russian leader, pleading for help. Russia didn't hesitate. It entered Syria militarily to stop ISIS, also known as ISIL or Daesh. You might wonder, did Russia act out of compassion? Or did Putin see Syria as a prize, just like he sees Ukraine? To answer this, let's consider a little-known moment involving John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, in 2016. A secret audio recording from a closed-door meeting reveals what really drove Western decisions in Syria.
The reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus, and that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government. And we know that this was growing. We were watching. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength, and we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Putin to...
We're still in the United States, where the battlefield legend, Donald John Trump, forced enemies to retreat. In 2017, Trump terminated a CIA Central Intelligence Agency program that had been training so-called rebel fighters in Syria. Why? Because he knew those fighters were in reality jihadists and terrorists, trained in brutal tactics like beheading. Earlier this year, the US Embassy in Syria openly acknowledged that Julani was a former suicide bomber with Al-Qaeda. The US government even placed a $10 million bounty on his head. But today, the same Julani is being applauded by the United States and its allies after seizing the highest seat of power in parts of Syria. Today, Syria is in the hands of Sunni Islamic factions, which makes Iran unable to exert any real influence there, as Iran's government is built on Shia Islam. This is a devastating loss for Iran, one that is difficult to fully comprehend even now. If you look at a map of the Middle East, the only land route Iran had to reach Hezbollah in Lebanon, near the Israeli border, was a direct corridor that passed through Iraq and Syria. After the removal of Saddam Hussein in Iraq and the near fall of Assad in Syria, Iran had a real opportunity to establish dominance in both countries, especially over matters of security near its longtime enemy, Israel. But the capture of Syria has cut off Hezbollah's lifeline, which had been based in Iran. Now, allow me to introduce you to a series of betrayals orchestrated by America to eliminate powerful leaders across the Arab world. Listen to this.
This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Out of the 7 countries previously mentioned, only Iran remains. At one point, a CNN journalist asked Donald Trump,
But you also recently said that the Middle East would be better off with Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and Assad in power. How does...
I didn't say Assad, but we certainly have not gained anything with Gaddafi. And you look at what happened. I mean, look at Libya. Look at Iraq. Iraq used to be no terrorists. He would kill the terrorists immediately. It was like, now it's the Harvard of terrorism. Iraq. If you look at Iraq from years ago, I'm not saying he was a nice guy. He was a horrible guy. But it was a lot better than it is right now. Right now, Iraq is a training ground for terrorists. Right now, Libya, nobody even knows Libya. Frankly, there is no Iraq and there is no Libya. It's all...
The journalist went on to ask Donald Trump whether the world would be better off if Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi were still in power, and also questioned him about Assad, specifically regarding his alleged human rights violations. Trump responded directly and without hesitation.
Nobody knows what's going on.
The world would be better off with Saddam Hussein
100%.
and Gaddafi in power?
100%. Now, as far as Assad is concerned,
what about the human rights abuses?
Let's talk about, well, you don't think they're happening now? They're worse now than they ever were. People are getting their heads chopped off. They're being drowned. Right now, they're far worse than they were ever under Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. I mean, look what happened. Libya is a catastrophe. You look at our ambassador as an example, okay? Libya is a disaster. Iraq is a disaster. Syria is a disaster. The whole Middle East. And it all blew up around Hillary Clinton and around Barack Obama. It all blew up. Now, one thing about Assad, not a good guy. I understand that. But we're backing and spending billions and billions of dollars on backing rebels that we have no idea who they are. And a lot of people think they're ISIS. I happen to think they're ISIS, but who knows? But we're spending billions of dollars to get Assad out with people that we have no idea who they are. I don't think that's smart. We have to rebuild our country. Our country's falling to pieces. We have $19 trillion in debt. We have infrastructure that's a disaster. Our roadways, our airports, our schools, everything. We have to start thinking about ourselves. We're pouring trillions of dollars into the Middle East, and we have nothing for it. We have nothing.
Today, President Donald Trump is leading United States since January 20th, 2025. Among the things he's said in the past, one statement stands out. He blamed America for turning Libya into ruins, and he made it clear he was not proud of it. But let's take a brief step back to understand what really happened in Libya. On October 20th, 2011, a dark and tearful day fell upon Libya and Africa as a whole, as the boots of neo-colonialists trampled freely on African sovereignty. That day marked the death of Muammar Mohammed Abu Minyar al-Gaddafi, the revolutionary leader and symbol of Pan-African resistance.
But tonight, after months on the run, Muammar Gaddafi is dead.
He was killed by rebel forces in the city of Sirte, ending his 42-year reign that began with a coup in 1969. Gaddafi was born in Qasr Abu Hadi, near Sirte, in the Libyan desert on June 7, 1942. He carried many honorific titles and was praised for his visionary leadership, often referred to as the revolutionary leader, the King of Kings of Africa. His fierce and defiant rhetoric shook colonial powers and Western imperialists, and some believe it's exactly what led to his downfall. Gaddafi feared no one, he compromised nothing, and he said it all openly, without apology. Just listen to some of the things he boldly declared.
أنا قايم بثورة عندها طروحات عالمية وساهمت في حركات التحرير مساهمة فعالة والدولة المستعمرة لا تريد هذا طبعا عشان كذا صوروني بهذه الصورة أنا يعني مبادئي ما تغيرتش.
In other words, Gaddafi's ultimate ambition for Africa was to eliminate colonialism once and for all. Under his leadership, Libya became the most advanced nation in Africa, even by today's standards. Libya was one of only 2 African countries that had never been fully colonized. By 2011, the Central Bank of Libya held 144 tons of gold in reserve. Gaddafi had a revolutionary plan to launch a gold-backed currency, and he envisioned that it would be adopted by all African and Muslim countries. The threat this posed to the dominance of the US dollar and the euro caused serious concern in the West. The United States learned about Gaddafi's gold dinar project through Sidney Blumenthal, senior advisor to the president, who informed Hillary Clinton via email that Libya's government was holding 144 tons of gold and an equal amount of silver in reserve. The situation became even more tense when former French President Nicolas Sarkozy learned about Libya's gold and silver holdings. Driven by personal and national interests, Sarkozy launched military intervention against Libya. His motives included gaining access to Libya's oil resources, reasserting France's political influence in Libya and across North Africa, boosting his domestic political standing, restoring the global prestige of the French military, and above all, sabotaging Gaddafi's dream of liberating French-speaking Africa, what the French call France-Afrique. Now let's talk about the gold-backed currency, a dream that could have transformed Africa forever. I hope you now fully understand. In other words, Gaddafi's plan was to stop sending oil revenue into US banks and instead channel it into state-controlled banks across Africa. Simply put, the goal was to reduce reliance on the US dollar in Africa's oil trade, particularly in nations like Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Angola. In fact, many of these countries were ready to switch currencies the moment Gaddafi's gold dinar became official. But that dream vanished like smoke. In March 2011, NATO, the cooperative of looters, launched a military intervention in Libya, pretending it was for security and humanitarian reasons. The tragic part? Many Libyans didn't know the truth. They believed the Western media narrative and failed to support their leader, unaware that he was being hunted like an animal. They bought into colonial lies, that they were being rescued from Gaddafi's dictatorship, a man accused of rejecting democracy. And yes, they got that democracy. Gaddafi tried to escape to the city of Sirte, but was captured alive, only to be brutally murdered soon after. His death was followed by the collapse of his government, civil war, ongoing instability, and endless power struggles between Western-backed factions, including NATO-supported militias. Do you remember that Gaddafi warned us about all of this long before it happened?
المختلفين سياسيين معاه ومختلفين حتى مع بعضنا نحن الآن. ما في حاجة تجمعنا أبدا إلا القاعة هذه. ليش ما يكون فيها تحقيق في مقتل صدام حسين؟ قيادة عربية بالكامل تقتل تشنق في المشانق ونحن نتفرج، لماذا؟ ممكن الدور جاي عليكم كلكم. نعم.
After Gaddafi made those statements, many in the room burst into laughter, mocking him. Perhaps they were thinking, what is this old man rambling about now? We're far from such nonsense. The meeting was being broadcast live on television. As Gaddafi spoke, journalists pointed their cameras at Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, who was laughing heartily, and at Bashar al-Assad of Syria, who was also visibly amused. In that same speech, Gaddafi warned of what had happened to Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Saddam was killed by the United States primarily because of his decision to sell Iraq's oil in euros instead of US dollars. This was a major threat to the US economy and the dollar's global dominance, especially with the looming idea of a gold-backed currency, gold dinar. Hussein's decision triggered significant financial fear in Washington, and many viewed his actions as economic warfare. He even declared the US dollar the currency of the enemy. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, such monetary moves could have sparked a new global currency war, something Western and Middle Eastern powers feared deeply. Another man who laughed at Gaddafi and later paid a heavy price was Hosni Mubarak. In February 2011, just 3 years after Gaddafi warned Arab leaders, the Arab Spring erupted. In Egypt, massive student protests led to the fall of Mubarak, who had ruled for 30 years. Ironically, Mubarak, who had risen through military power, stepped down without bloodshed. He was imprisoned, publicly humiliated, and later released in 2017. He died in 2020 at age 91. Everything Gaddafi had warned him about came true. The wars in Arab countries are full of deception and betrayal, so treacherous that even your bodyguards could be secretly trained special forces ready to turn on you at a moment's notice. And that brings us to the end of this episode. What have you learned about the wars in the Middle East? Wars of blood, yes, but also gateways to looting and profit for others. Thanks for watching. I wish you better life, foods, and money. Stay in the Big Wins family.